Not really sure what you would want it for. The picture that they have is of people with an extremely large expanse of leaves that they are shoveling with great haste into this composter. Be interesting to see how that turned out, but nonetheless, in theory it could work because compost is somewhat warmer than, it's warm enough to keep you from getting hypothermia for sure. So hopefully the compost process would heat up the room and make it nice and warm inside. Good place to drink tea. That is, if you don't mind the compost smell, which would be a little interesting. The next thing I want to talk about is the World Cup 2010. Very excited about the World Cup this coming summer. Very, very excited about it. And before I say anything else about that, let me just read what I wrote here. The biblical idea of Sabbath involves rest. One day a week, humans are told to rest. Then in Leviticus 25, the land is supposed to be given sabbaths every 7 years. Of course, the rationale for the exile lasting so long was because the land was not given sabbaths. As a Christian who cares about the environment or God's creation, I think it's important for us to take sabbaths and to give the land which God blesses us with a rest too. First part. Now, like I said, I'm a huge soccer fan. I played when I was growing up. I was on the Olympic development team in East Texas at one point. And when I see World Cup commercials on TV, I can barely sit down. I get so excited. So indulge me for a moment. Could the World Cup function as a Sabbath for the world? Think about it. The cumulative audience for the 2006 World Cup was 29.26 billion viewers. Now that's taking into account the entire tournament, all of the different matches, so forth. People all over the world are united by this one event. Some people even skip work to watch games. I hope the USA unites behind our boys, led by Landon Donovan, who will hopefully play better in this World Cup. He's my boy. I think he will. The Cup could bring a sense of unity to the world. It's awfully high hopes for a sporting event, I realize, but I hope that we will all enjoy a chance to take rest and cheer for our boys. That we could get really excited about what's going on and just enjoy a fun event and cheering for our team and unite as a nation around something that we're a part of. I just think it could be a lot of fun, and therefore function somewhat similar to a Sabbath in that respect of relaxation. Now, obviously, we would have to build in an element of worship in there somewhere, recognizing God. But that's beyond the scope of what I was thinking at that time. The other thing I wanted to talk about was something that a reader had commented about, which was the doctrine of continuing creation. And I have this book here, which is rather old, not too old, but it's dated now, Old Testament Theology, written by Edmund Jacob, copyright 1958, so it tells you it's been around a long time. Nonetheless, it's pretty influential Old Testament theology. He's one of the big boys. Over on page 139, talking about creation, he says this. I'm going to read a paragraph here in response to Matt Humphrey's comment. Creation, being a commencement, has a sequel. No doubt God completes creation at the beginning. He makes everything. The Hebrew term for that is hakol. He gives them independence and fixes laws for them which should automatically ensure their maintenance in virtue of a decree proclaimed once for all. And he cites Genesis 1:11, 22, 28, and several other texts. But other texts, he says, generally more ancient, draw much less distinction between the creation and the conservation of the world, and make it possible for us to speak of a creatio continua. Between the creation and what follows it, says Karl Barth, there is no metabasis eis allo genos. For you Greek scholars, we'll leave it there. The former does not end with the history of covenant. The former does not end when history begins, but problems reading there today. The former does not end when the history of the covenant begins and continues. What we think of as the providence of God, namely the conservation and governance of men and of the world, is just as much creation. It's continuing creation. But the other statement is quite as true. History itself commences with the creation. Creation has the character of history. It is an event which occupies time. The origin of the people of Israel, even the birth of each individual, are presented as creations of God, who does not act as a first cause, but who ceaselessly intervenes by his Spirit and Word to guarantee the preservation of creation. Here again, it is appropriate to notice the analogy between creation and covenant, for it is equally by the Spirit and Word, of which the prophets are principal agents, that history takes place. Spirit and Word are not independent forces acting ex opere operato, but only become effective by express order of their Creator. I thought that's important to read in light of the idea of continuing creation versus creation as a completed project. Both ideas are there in the Bible, but I think as theology developed, if you look at the idea of progressive revelation, that is, that God is progressively revealing more and more about himself over time, then you see that that God's people come to understand not only that he is the creator and that he created things, set them in motion, but that he also sustains them, and in that sense is continually creating. In a more explicit sense, though, God is also involved in a recreation of sorts when he brings the people back from exile. You'll see those descriptions couched in that creation language in Isaiah, especially. Then also, prophets of the Second Temple period, latter Isaiah and Zechariah, Haggai, those you'll see terms of creation being used to describe the judgment type scenes. So you could even say that creation has a relationship with the apocalyptic in the prophets. So those are some things that I'd like for you to think about this week. I hope you will remember to love God by caring for his creation. And I really hope that you'll do me a favor and go over to the website, www.otecology.com, and click on the link on the right-hand side of the page that has to do with our podcast survey, which is specifically for podcast listeners. It will help me learn a little bit more about our listeners, and it will also help us to be able to improve the show a little bit, which is always fun. Just FYI, we have listeners, goodness, from all over the world, and I do mean that. Every continent except Antarctica, obviously. We have listeners, and predominantly, of course, in the USA. Strangely enough, from Dallas area, which is not where I live, but that's okay. And then second most amount of listeners comes from either the UK or sometimes in India. So I hope that all of you are doing wonderful around the world, and I hope that you will enjoy the show.